Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest series of NUITEQ Snowflake webinars. Tonight, we will be talking about teaching students to create, moving students from input to output. So we're going to be talking to you all about how to take students, take them out of just consuming information and having them learn how to build information. Danielle, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you this evening. And if you, as always, have any questions, please put those questions in the chat and I will transfer them over to Danielle at an opportune time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jack. So hi, everyone. Without further ado, we're going to talk today about how to move students from the input to the output. So moving students from passive consumers to content creators. So I'm going to start by sharing with everyone tonight a Snowflake lesson activity that describes a little bit more the idea of content consumers versus content creators. So this is a groups lesson activity type. I thought it would be a really good template to show the two different categories. Where a lot of students fall in education tends to be in that consumer model, and what our goal should be as educators to really drive forward good quality instruction and meaningful instruction is to get kiddos in that content creators portion. So as a content consumer, students spend on average 7+ hours of screen time per day just on entertainment. So in a study that was done by Common Sense Media, surveying most teenage students, so we're talking 13 and up, they found that students on average, this was how much time they were on a device for purely entertainment value, whether it's playing games on their phone or on their Xbox, watching TikToks or on social media, YouTube, all of the stuff that students passively engage with. 7 hours was being spent doing that. And that tends to be a very passive model. Now, as educators, when students are using technology, our goal is to make that use of technology very meaningful, not using it just as a replacement for something that could be done just with paper and pencil, because they do spend a lot of time on screens and technology should be meaningful when it is being used. The other issue with being just a content consumer is it tends to fall in that model of traditional instruction, where you have your direct instruction for the entire class period by the teacher. Students take notes on the lecture, they study those notes, and then they have some sort of formal assessment based off of those notes. And that tends to involve just students repeating back information. They're not building those meaningful connections. And as a result of not building the meaningful connections, there is a lower long-term memory retention. I think a lot of us can probably look back at our own experiences in education and think of classes that we took where we probably studied and studied and studied and studied just to pass the test. And today don't remember anything that was about. I know this was the case with pretty much any science class I had to take. I struggled. I had to study really, really hard just to do well on the tests. And now today I remember minimal of what I was taught because I didn't build those meaningful connections. I didn't have a chance to store that into my long-term memory. And our goal then, so that we have information that is stored in students' long-term memory, is to move students to that content creator section of learning. That's important because with creation, you have the highest level of cognitive learning under Bloom's taxonomy. So this is where that meaningful, authentic, real learning happens. And this is where students are able to build those long-term connections and synthesize that information so that it does become relevant and something that they will kind of always hold on to. With that, it also leads to increased engagement. When students have an opportunity to be a little bit more creative and have more ownership over their learning, they're going to be more invested in what they have to learn, giving them that choice and voice. If you came to any of our most recent webinars, we had a session on using student choice boards to provide those opportunities. We also talked a little bit about project-based learning. So if you weren't at any of those live sessions, check out the YouTube channel to see more information about how to incorporate that and using Snowflake on how to do that. So when you get that increased engagement, it makes it meaningful and it helps students remember what they are learning so that they have that lifelong connection to it. And then the last part is moving students into a content creator by making connections with those 6 C's of education. The 6 C's involve creativity, critical thinking skills, collaboration, communication, character education, and citizenship. So those are the newest 21st century skills, those skills of education that make students marketable as they leave the classroom and move forward into the workforce. So that's the why of moving students from content consumers into a content creator method. The struggle that many teachers have is, how do they do that? How do you move beyond that traditional standing in front of the class or in front of your computer and lecturing the whole time? And how do you move so that students now have an opportunity to be the creators? And a lot of that can be explained in some pretty easy ways to do it. With everything that we are showing to you and sharing with you, our goal is to never overwhelm. It's to always make sure that you have the resources you need and to encourage you to start small, adopting any of these practices. So a couple simple ways on how to move students to content creators is by incorporating what are called creation bell ringers. I used the term bell ringer when I taught my middle school students. And a bell ringer is your first of class task to kind of demonstrate understanding. It's not your take out your homework or get your textbook open. It's not the housekeeping. It's the now we're ready to start actively learning. And one of the things I often did with my own students is I would have them take the information we learned from the previous class and create something with it. And we would do this in a variety of ways. Sometimes we would have mini whiteboards and my students would need to illustrate a concept. Other times we had, and they loved when we did this, I had little tiny containers of Play-Doh that I think I found for like 25 cents each. And my students had to then build something related to what I had taught from the previous day. As a social studies teacher, that's pretty easy to do. If I was saying, build for me what a monarchy looks like. If we were discussing government, they could take the Play-Doh and build something. The idea is by doing something that's creation, whether it's maybe an illustration or if you're fortunate to do the Play-Doh thing, it gets kids actively engaged in what they're doing. They're having to think about what they've learned in a different way, and they have an opportunity to present their understanding of that in a unique and special way. I just recently saw a video of a teacher who, doing remote learning with her students, did a mini project that would probably fall really great into this category, where she had her students, and I wish I could find the teacher so I could give a shout out to that person, but she had her students create little laundry sculptures. So using the laundry on their floor or from their hamper or from wherever, they took the little structure or the pieces of laundry and set it up so it would look like something else. So one student set their laundry up to look like Santa Claus. Another student created their made their laundry look like a sailboat. So it was just a fun way to kind of add that engagement and have students think about something in a non-traditional way. So normally you think laundry and it's a chore. You don't usually think of like the fun stuff you could do with it. So it was a fun way to just get students engaged in what the rest of the lesson would be like. Other ways to move students to content creators is through different cross-disciplinary approaches. So incorporating social studies and science into a math class, or incorporating math into a science and social studies class. So building those connections across curriculum and having students examine that from different ways. So again, from my own experience teaching, one of the ways that we would incorporate different science and math skills in my class is through we had a unit where we did a CSI on King Tut, trying to determine his actual cause of death. And my students had to examine x-rays, and they had to use like forensic evidence to come up with their conclusion of what they thought happened. So they were able to build those bridges between the different subject areas. Another way to help students become content creators instead of those passive consumers is by incorporating project-based learning or choice boards. So we did have webinars about this where we talked about how giving students that voice and choice is going to help them have more meaningful experiences in education. Another way with that is through inquiry-based learning. So if you're able to come to our webinar next week, we'll talk a little more about how to use inquiry-based learning versus a project-based learning method in your classroom. And those are just more ways to bring in students into that content creator role. And then of course, we have using Snowflake lesson activities. So what better way for students to demonstrate their understanding of what you had taught them than having those students use a Snowflake lesson activity template to create their own lesson activity. So to share with you a little more about that. So I'm going to first share with you some lesson activities that are from this Snowflake community that students can manipulate and use in what would maybe be a non-traditional way as a way to be content creators. And then we'll talk a little bit more too about how students can build their own lesson activities and share those with you as a teacher. So one example, this is a lesson activity in our Snowflake community. It is a science activity. And this does relate to Next Gen Science Standards. Yes?
I have a question of, are the students allowed to share their lessons to the community?
They are not allowed to publish them to the community. They can only share them in a group with their teachers, which I think is a good feature. Sometimes students might put together something that's just kind of a little out there or doesn't meet maybe what we would want in our community guidelines as far as academic content or the rigor. And we make it so they can't publish to the community. They can only share with their teacher. So they can build all they want, but only their teachers will be able to see it.
And you're going to explain how they would share it to the group.
Yes. Yep, we'll talk about how to share it to your group. So this particular lesson activity, we have our different examples here, and it does come with a full lesson plan. In this relates to an activity where students would be learning about different structures and how to design and illustrate, or how to design something using different materials. So it's kind of a fun, like STEM related virtual activity. So in this case, the task would be, and it comes with worksheets explaining more, the students would have to figure out how to build a bridge to get this little fox from one side of the river to the other side. And this particular lesson activity type is a seats template. And seats is a really fun way to just manipulate and move the different boxes. These boxes can also be different shapes. You can have circles, you can have hexagons, and students can manipulate and move those boxes around. So I can build my bridge, and then I can share this with my teacher to kind of show, like, here's the bridge that I built for my fox. And as a teacher, I can provide feedback. If you're in remote instruction, you can send this to students, or if you're doing in person, students can open this on their interactive panel, and you can set it up in multiple zones and have students do different types of bridges or structures using the materials provided. Another fun lesson activity that is in the community for language arts using that same seats template is one called Snoggle. So it's kind of like, I think the game's Boggle, where you move letters or rearrange letters to spell words. So in this case, you have all of your words. This one is locked in a grid. So as I move, they're just going to switch places. So you can have students move this around to try and spell words, or shuffle and look for words within the grid itself. And this is also a really fun template that students can build and create with, so they can create their own designs. I got really into like a seats kick earlier this week, where I just thought of so many different ways that this lesson template can be used, instead of just using it as a way to build your seating chart. So many other fun ways. This one we shared recently about for Week of Code, where students would help this little chicken get across the road, moving around these commands. And then I was playing with some holiday themed ones, where this one I think is a cookie and Santa themed. So this could be edited to have different words. Students could move around the cookies onto Santa's plate. So just different ways to use, kind of thinking outside of that traditional way of how to use the lesson activities. Now, from another standpoint of having students create their own lesson activities, so we looked at ways they can kind of play the activities in ways to be more creative. Other ways would be by designing their own lesson activities and then sharing them with their teachers in a group. So once you have set up your Snowflake.live classes, which is through the Manage Students option, students can then be added into a group. And in their group, they have the opportunity to share lesson activities to their teacher. I'll show first from the teacher perspective, and then I'll switch to my student account so you can see where on the student dashboard that option would be and how a student would share with their teacher. So I'm going to look at my science class, and I see I have my group members. So this is from my teacher demo account. I can see the additional students I've added to my group, and I can see the lesson activities that have been added into the group, including the lesson activity created by my student. From a teacher perspective, one of the features I have when building a group is I can assign privileges to my students. So I have, my teacher, and then let's say Miss Macklin is my co-teacher. They have admin privileges. That means they can add in any lesson activity at any point without review. My students have only member privileges. As a member, students can browse and play the lesson activities. They can add a lesson activity, but that lesson activity would appear here needing approval before it would be accepted. So I had approved this student's activity. I would need to hit accept in order for that lesson activity to be added in. If I decided later, like, oh, there was a typo, or I want a student to make an edit on that activity, I can remove that activity from the group and then have that student rework and do what would be needed in order to add the lesson activity back in, and then it would be re-accepted in. So that is the teacher dashboard of using groups with your students. I'm going to, if you'll just give me 1 second, I'm going to switch to my student account. And while I'm doing that, if there are any questions, please go ahead and send them over into our chat. I'm going to try and type quietly too.
Danielle?
Yes.
If the students in our school don't have email addresses, are they able to have a student account?
Only students right now with email are able to be added into, into a student account. Yes. Yes. So even without, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were asking. Yes, so even your students who might not have email, this is especially the case with a lot of younger students. They might not have email access until they're in middle school or high school even. You can set up a Snowflake class for those students using the auto-generated entry of the manual ad for their name. There's an option to click student has no email, and that should be able to create the account for them. And it'll give them a password and a username. So in my student account, so from the student dashboard, it has many similar features to a teacher dashboard, but we do see things are laid out a little different on this start page. This is showing all of the lesson activities that Snowy still needs to complete. And then any ones that have been played from the community or any ones that I as a student have created. So as a student, if I create a lesson activity, and I'm just going to do a really simple cards activity. So we'll say that this is just cards activity. I have my group. I'll have my matching card. Okay. So maybe a question on one side, answer on the other. So my flashcards, maybe I'm reviewing vocabulary for my teacher. I can have my description. So just like from a teacher perspective, all of the features that you have in building a lesson activity, the ability to add video, the ability to add PDF, to add web links. Maybe if a student had a Google Doc they wanted to incorporate, they can add that as well. They can do all of the same customizations. And then instead of sharing to the Snowflake community, students have the option to share with group. Once a student selects share with group, I'll see all of the groups that this student has been added to. So I might want to share this with my science class. And then now I will add that to my group. And then from the student perspective, again, if I go back to my lesson activities, I'm able to access my groups here. So I can see all of the groups that I have been added to as a member. There's my science class. I can see the lesson activities that have been added in. And since I'm only a member, my lesson activity that I just shared, that cards lesson activity, has not been approved yet by my teacher. So I need to wait until that's approved before it is available to play. But with all of the other lesson activities, I have the ability to play any of those activities. So I can play the lesson activity from my teacher, and now that's going to be part of my Snowflake.live dashboard. So I'll have access to that on my main dashboard as well. So that's one way you can have students build their own lesson activities as a way to demonstrate their understanding of content, of the skills that you've taught them, and then they can share that in a collaborative space using groups. So that was a lot today. I know that there's so many different ways to use Snowflake for students, getting them in that position of being able to create their own lesson activities and move beyond just playing the ones that you may send them, being able to create their own. In the Snowflake community, we also have a lot of lesson activity templates that were designed for students to edit. So these are examples of cards, lesson templates that were created where students could then edit the entire lesson activity, and it's giving them the guides of what they need to do. So this would be a President's Day research project. My students have their task of what they would need to do, and then they have the opportunity to add and change. You can see the student already started editing their lesson activity and the instructions of what to include on each piece of that lesson activity. And then as a student, once I've completed that, I can share that back with my teacher into my group, and then now my classmates as well as my teacher will have access to what I have just created. So there's lots of those ideas throughout our Snowflake community as well. So at this point, are there any additional questions about anything we've talked about tonight, or if there's anything we can talk about with the past webinars on project-based learning or student choice boards, or any other ways to inspire students to become those content creators and move away from just passive content consumers?
There are no questions that are coming in based on the content tonight. There is one question, however, that asks, will there be a webinar next week?
Yes, we have a webinar scheduled for next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Let me check my notes. It is on project versus inquiry-based learning. So I think that'll be a really fun one to finish out 2020. We will be taking a little bit of a break for the holiday season, but we'll be back in January with future webinars after next week.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending this evening. We appreciate when you come in and listen to what Danielle has to share with you. And as always, any ideas or any questions that you have, please feel free to email me. My name is Jack Reed. My email is jr@nuiteq.com. Again, Danielle, thank you very much. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
It's my pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.